other than the defense team and the Davis family, is interested in letting the truth come to light. Now is the time that the State's Attorney's Office have some integrity. Now is the time that the State's Attorney's Office of Baltimore City stop lying about the facts and circumstances of June 7, 2015, and we will pursue the civil action as well as a push that the criminal action against Mr. Davis be dropped. I certainly thank you for your time, and at the end of this conference, I can certainly facilitate any questions that you may have.
Thank you. My name is Natalie Finnegar. I represent Mr. Davis in his upcoming murder trial in June. We're calling on the State's Attorney to dismiss the charges in this matter. It's not the first time that it's been highlighted that the charges in this case are extremely weak, circumstantial evidence tied only by a handgun, that we now have an independent review from the Civilian Review Board. The officers who originally testified in this matter testified inconsistently. The Civilian Review Board has found that their testimony is questionable, their credibility is questionable, and the Civilian Review Board went so far as to find that there is unclear, based upon that inconsistent testimony, whether or not Mr. Davis actually even had possession of the gun. Then becomes the basis of another criminal charge for which Mr. Davis could face life of imprisonment. It's shocking to me that it would take this long to get this far with this case. Ms. Mosby, in November of 2015, declined to prosecute the officers. She declined to prosecute the officers before the officers were even called upon to give their version of the events to Internal Affairs. This is one of the problems that we suffer with police brutality and with officers' discipline in Baltimore City. The officers weren't even given notification that they may need to provide information to Internal Affairs until 1 month after Ms. Mosby said, "I'm clearing you of the charges, I'm not going to prosecute you in this matter." And now what we have is such shocking evidence that the Civilian Review Board is able to gather and take a look at that they're calling for 2 of the officers to be terminated immediately, and 2 officers to receive a severe reprimand and to face disciplinary action. All of this adds up to one simple fact, and that is that Mr. Davis is innocent of these charges. He always has been, he always will be. He's innocent of the handgun violation for which he suffered a conviction, is currently serving time. Based upon the information that we have received from the Civilian Review Board, there's several steps that we'll be taking as the defense team in the criminal matter. 1, we will be requesting for full disclosure of the records that the Civilian Review Board had access to. It's crucial that we have those documents. If those officers' testimony was so inconsistent that they would be calling for the 2 officers to be fired, that is exculpatory information. That is information that belongs in the hands of the defense. That is information that will now be able to be launched for a motion for a new trial or for a petition for writ of actual innocence. We're not giving up on Mr. Davis's conviction that he suffered in that handgun charge. And we're not giving up on the charges that he faces with the murder. Ms. Mosby's office has already had 1 motion for new trial granted based upon the conduct of her assistant state's attorney in the matter, overreaching, overstepping bounds. It is time for this case to be dismissed. To not dismiss it, to not admit at this point that it was error on her part, is to deny justice to all the citizens of Baltimore. We have members of the support team that have surrounded Mr. Davis. Obviously, he can't be here today. His wife is here. I'd like to call upon his wife to make a few comments about the struggles that their family has faced in fighting these charges. And let's not forget, Mr. Davis was shot, injured at the hands of the Baltimore City Police Department. And I can tell you, in my visits with Mr. Davis, I have seen him struggle physically based upon those injuries. He continues to struggle to breathe on nights that I go to visit him, that we talk about his case. This is a very serious matter. This is a matter that affects everyone in Baltimore, and it's a situation that should be ended immediately. Kelly, would you like to speak?
Thank you guys so much for being here. For 3 years, I have yelled, screamed, gone to used every platform, every venue, every media source, anything to get the word out that my husband is innocent. My husband did nothing wrong that day, but survive. 44 shots shot at him from 4 Baltimore City police officers. No one has come to Keith's aid. This city, every agency, every entity has failed Keith thus far until this independent commission from the Civilian Review Board. The police, all we ever wanted was answers. The state's attorney, who we believed would rectify this situation, as this is our same state's attorney that stood on the War Memorial steps and pleaded that justice and fairness comes to all. Police, no matter who comes under her administration, they will be dealt with. That was not the case. Keith suffered physically, and he was thrown in jail, all the while being guilty of nothing more than being innocent and surviving that day. And to add insult to injury, after 4 trials, we're going into a 4th trial in a city with thousands of murder, wasting time, money, resources, energy, holding up courtrooms, and the evidence has never changed. The reality has never changed. Keith is innocent. He belongs here. And instead of doing something about this, Keith was persecuted, he was targeted, and he was relentlessly and endlessly prosecuted by the Baltimore City State's Attorney, Marilyn Mosby. And because we stood up, because we didn't let it go, this is the result. We're still standing here today with justice. These pictures highlight what we've been saying for so long, and that it is very clear that they have tried so hard to hide what they did to him behind allegations against him. So today, the word needs to be clear. We have not stopped in 3 years, and we will not stop. For Marilyn Mosby to continue to hold this city hostage for her own personal vendettas, for her own inability to see the truth, for her collusion with the relationships that she has, it ends today. We will get justice for Keith. Keith will be home where he is needed. He will be able to be home where he can get the adequate medical conditions. He will be free because he did nothing wrong on June 7th, 2015. Although we knew something terribly went wrong, it wasn't until the Civilian Review Board did their independent investigation for 2 years that they came and they agreed that something went terribly wrong. But prosecuting Keith endlessly? No. He deserves to be home. He is innocent. And this paperwork, this ink, this holding officers accountable, saying that they did something so egregious on that day that they are calling for them to be terminated, this is the ink that we've been waiting for. And the fight does not stop until my husband crosses that threshold of my home. Thank you.
We're happy to take questions.
Natalie, historically, the Baltimore Police Department, police commissioners ignore the recommendations of the Civilian Review Board. Why would this case be any different?
You know, we hope that the new commissioner will take a serious look at this and abide by the Civilian Review Board's request. We provided copies of the letter that was given to Ms. Davis in which the Civilian Review Board asked, we respectfully request that you provide a board with a written explanation of your rationale so we can understand your position that you take with regards to this decision. We all respectfully ask the new police commissioner, tell us why you wouldn't terminate these officers, or if you choose to terminate the officers, please let the public know that you've agreed with the Civilian Review Board's independent conclusion. It's true, they don't have to abide by it. It's one of the problems that we have in terms of the code and the negotiations that have happened with the police union. But maybe it's time for the police commissioner to really take this matter seriously.
And can I add to that? What's different about Mr. Davis's case is there is literally a mountain of evidence showing that Mr. Davis is innocent. This isn't creative thinking. This isn't making up facts. We have a mountain of evidence, and let's begin with what James Waxter from the Firearms Examination Unit has already said. There was no evidence this handgun was fired, period. We've had 3 trials. If you remember, I'd asked him on cross-examination, did you not testify previously that this handgun had never been fired? His answer was yes, and that was it. So the facts in this case have not changed. Ms. Halsey Davis is correct. The facts have not changed. It would be egregious for our new commissioner not to take into consideration the reality of what's happening with Mr. Davis.
As well as in light of GTTF, where we're all wondering how these officers got along so far without any accountability, without any transparency. Here you have a civilian review board that is telling you, this is our findings, this is our investigation, and the ball is in your court. But if we continue to hide it and we continue to not do anything about it, then what have we learned from the trials of the Gun Task Trace Force?
The letter mentions the discrepancy between testimony from the officers and their statements to Internal Affairs. Do you have any other information about what those statements contain, or when they were given, or which IAD statements it is that it's referring to?
Thank you for that question. That's very important. As many of you may know, in order for a defense attorney to get access to an Internal Affairs Division record, you have to have a reason to be even asking for it. Tomorrow we'll be filing subpoenas for the full IAD disclosures for these officers, and we have very good reason to believe that there's something in the IAD file that relates to their credibility. So I expect, hope, pray that we don't fight the police department and the state's attorney's office for access to those records. In addition, we're going to be filing for a Public Information Act request for the records that the Civilian Review Board had. This is exculpatory information. I shouldn't even have to ask for it. I shouldn't have to, by happenstance, find out that it exists. It should have been delivered to my office on a silver platter, as far as I'm concerned. And so that's the fight that we'll have to fight, and hopefully we won't have to put up the fight. But we will if we need to. These records belong to Mr. Davis. He needs to have access to them. These officers have credibility issues. If the state's going to rely on them for a murder charge, then we need to have access to them.
Natalie, so building on that, I know last month I think the city solicitor and state's attorney announced some new rules concerning the release of IAD files. Have you had any experience with those new rules yet? Do you feel like the process is improving, that you're getting access to the files faster in a more fair way?
No, we haven't seen any changes. What we have now is a system of trust. So we have to rely upon the police department to have an accurate assessment of what records need to be provided to the state's attorney's office and for them to give us disclosure. But I haven't seen a change in anything. It is business as usual with regards to us getting access to officers' credibility issues in their personnel files.
Kelly, have you talked to Keith since you got this letter?
Unfortunately, the prison is under a lockdown, so I have not been able to speak with Keith over the phone in about 5 days, and I have not been able to physically see him in about 10 days. So, God willing, he's somewhere in his cell, and he'll be able to watch this once you guys post it. And of course, Natalie will probably be able to see him or speak with him much faster than I will be able to.
I know Mrs. Halsey Davis brought up the point that, this is the same state's attorney who stood on the steps of the War Memorial Building and announced charges against the Freddie Gray officers, saying that she's going to take a stand against police corruption. If she took that stand, if she went to trial in those cases, why isn't she dropping the Keith Davis case?
It's unfathomable to me how she can make a decision before the officers even make a statement that she won't prosecute them and then stick by that decision. But then on top of it, I can't even begin to imagine why I still have a trial date scheduled in June. Seems to me like we could all move on to some other cases here in Baltimore.
And if I may add to that, we have always said that this effort to use Mr. Davis's case as a political football is not acceptable. Our goal, certainly, in collaborating with the civil and the criminal, we'd like to have parallel litigation. So perhaps we can move the civil along with the criminal, but hopefully the criminal is simply dismissed as we move forward with the civil. But again, using Mr. Davis as a victim of police brutality and police shooting as a political football is unacceptable. And we expect the community to weigh in and let Ms. Mosby know that this is unacceptable. You can do so by going to the ballot box and voting when it's time to vote.
Yes, and to add to that, I think that this is a clear indication that the person that we saw on those steps had great showmanship, as well as her sound bites in media. When the cameras are here, when it's time to be on, that is what you get. You get the Marilyn Mosby that's proactive and ready to work. But the reality is, you get the Marilyn Mosby that we have and why this case is here, and that's the Marilyn Mosby that does absolutely nothing if it does not benefit her. And like Ms. Williams said, in I think a matter of 60 or so days, on June 26th, this city cannot take another 4 years of Marilyn Mosby. It just cannot. And I think that that's important, and I think that's something that people need to realize and understand.
For the last couple of years, y'all have been arguing to juries in the cases and to the press and wherever else that the gun that was found in the garage was planted, and people thought that that was maybe a stretching it or a far-flung story. And the revelations from the Gun Trace Task Force, how has that changed the way that this case is being perceived, or the way that you'll argue the case?
I guess we have 100% admission by former Baltimore City police officers that guns are occasionally planted. Maybe we can just kind of put that issue to bed and say that happens, it's happened, and then move on from there.
Because it's been our reality for 3 years.
Did the Civilian Review Board find that the gun was planted?
Obviously, they didn't go that far, but they did find credibility with the police officers' testimony, and they also found some serious questions to whether or not Mr. Davis had the gun.
If this happened to Keith Davis, how many other individuals do you think this happened to behind, not just the gun task force, but just regular Baltimore City police officers? Because this wasn't the gun task force that did this. This was regular officers that you see on the streets to answer calls, a 911. So how many other innocent people are sitting in jail behind this?
Okay. I've been a defense attorney in Baltimore City for over 20 years. And the stories that we heard come out of those corrupt police officers are the stories that I've heard from clients for over 2 decades. It's like the rest of the city got woke up to the experience that my clients have had and poor communities in Baltimore City have had for many, many years. It happens. I'm not saying it happens all the time. I'm not saying it happens the majority of the time. But it does happen, which means there are plenty more innocent victims out there who have suffered at the hands of corrupt police officers.
And may I add to that, that this could be you. This could be your loved one. This could be your son or your daughter. The ease within which the state's attorney's office is willing to